Okay, recording.
Alright, brilliant. So,
Please introduce yourself and your topic.
ladies, gentlemen, and everything in between, welcome to the presentation of von Neumann machines, past, present, and future. So, firstly, I am Yudhanjaya, and we are talking on this topic. So, firstly, what is a von Neumann machine? Essentially, at the most basic level, it's something that it's a machine that can replicate itself. Now, the concept of von Neumann machines actually goes back to the first recorded concept of von Neumann machines actually goes back to the days of Descartes, when he was
Descartes.
Pardon?
Descartes. Yeah.
Descartes. But carry on, it's fine.
Pronunciation, if you see something wrong, correct it, please. When he was lecturing Queen Christina, and he said, "Your Majesty, the human body is like a clock, it's only a sophisticated machine." And Queen Christina pointed at the clock and says, "See to it then that this produces offspring." Now, it was until that time, from that time until the 1940s, this concept was brought up many times, but it was mostly in the abstract, just to see if things replicate. Mostly it was just theological argument. So, in 1940, John von Neumann, the famous scientist, came up with something that he called the universal constructor. It was essentially, it can be split into three parts. There is something called the description tape. Back then people were talking tapes. There is something called the description tape that contains the instructions for this thing. Then there is something called the tape duplicator that produces a copy of those instructions. Then there is something called the controller that reads the tape and passes it down to whatever it's been built, right? Pass it down to constructor. So what you get is, when you combine the tape and the constructor, what you get is a machine that can read a tape, build something, and then copy the instructions onto it. Essentially a machine that replicates itself. So this was published in the theory of self-producing automata, is it? Automata? Yeah. Okay, 1966. If you look at it really closely, tape is equal to DNA in a cell. What von Neumann described was pretty much a simplified version of DNA in a cell. So this idea, though, nobody let go of it because it was too awesome to let go. So you find it popping up in science fiction all over the place. Van Vogt wrote a trilogy called Voyage of the Space Beagle, in which self-replicating manufacturing plants fill the whole galaxy. And then there was also a fairly horrifying series of science fiction where humanity was at war with an entire von Neumann ecology. Right? In 1963, Bracewell, another scientist, said, "Let's use probes for exploring space instead of listening to radio signals like what SETI does." At the time, he was making a point for not scanning the universe for radio signals because it was costly and expensive. You could only cover so much. He said, "Let's send out probes." In 1974, another scientist called Arbib said, we might as well start designing self-producing machines. Sorry if I'm reading out the text. We might as well start designing these things. We might actually get around to designing self-replicating machines that replicate themselves using the materials in interstellar gas. However, what if they start to mutate? Now that is where things get really interesting. So throughout, in fact, calling this von Neumann machines is a bit of an injustice to the number of people that have done research on this. There's been a tremendous amount. So scientists generally prefer to call it self-replicating machines, but I'll just highlight some of the more important things that I found. 1970 1974, John Case wrote a paper called Periodicity in Generations of Automata. It dealt with machines that essentially produce distorted versions of themselves. 1973 1974, sexually reproducing cellular automata. That essentially was sexual reproduction built into von Neumann's initial theory, into the initial tape reproduced theory. And then Richard Lang wrote a paper called Self-Replicating Molecular Machines, which described machines made of basic molecule-like parts that could essentially self-inspect. Here's the thing, it could self-inspect what was going to replicate and adapt that. Now, this is a system never seen in any known biological system. In effect, it's like an organism that can inspect its own DNA, re-engineer that so that its next generation would be exponentially smarter. So you would have an evolution process that is intelligent, that is created with the intelligent intent of itself. Then Robert Freitas, who is arguably the godfather of this particular this branch of science, 1980 wrote a paper called Self-Replicating Interstellar Probes. He modified the British Daedalus project. This is brilliant. He literally modified the Daedalus project, and he came up with all of these figures. He called it retro. He looked at the US economy, what materials they had, what they could produce, and they said this and this and this is what we can build. This is how the system is going to be built. Like, he literally went so far as to list the elements that this thing would carry on board, the percentages, the amount of mass, everything's there, right? He detailed, like, for example, titanium coil supports, component mass, pellet injector, reaction chambers, component mass, everything, like, right down to the last element. He mapped it out. This guy was a big thinker. One of his other famous papers was Self-Replicating Lunar Factory for NASA. This was when the whole world was dreaming of these things, right? We haven't, unfortunately, since the 1980s, we haven't really done that much, because people like him were dreaming, and then money happened, and then wars happened, and NASA's budget became reallocated, and so on and so forth. So, why haven't we got around to this though? Because this was Project Daedalus, something designed in the 70s. In the 70s, like long ago. And essentially all these things, the components, the physical components rather, were present. They were circulating in the US economy at the time this paper was written. Why haven't we got around to it? Most people put this as a hardware problem. I don't think it is a hardware problem. I think it's a software problem. Because let's look at a proper description of a von Neumann machine. A von Neumann probe is a robot designed to reach distant star systems and create factories which will reproduce copies of themselves by the thousands, right? Skipping that part, these probes would live off the land using naturally occurring deposits of metals to create raw ingredients to build a robot factory and then create thousands of itself. This is done by Wijeratne, who is kind of like the Neil deGrasse Tyson of this particular field. Now, based on that, the von Neumann space machine has to analyze an unknown, potentially hostile environment, because we don't know what's out there, has to install itself, produce materials for reproduction, has to create by production an environment suitable for its end goals, that is to produce colonizing space or whatever it is for mankind. So this is an unimaginably complex logical problem, because how do you encode all of this stuff to encompass all of these potential variables because we don't know the conditions out there. We are honestly having enough trouble getting a rover to function on Mars. So how do you put all of these things and you create a machine that can do everything in a potentially hostile environment, because that in itself encompasses such a range when you're talking about the universe. So right now there are two approaches to the problem. There's the big approach. If you can't see it, read it out loud. Big approach is massive superstructures with specialized components, tons of computational capability, explicitly defined missions like go to place X, put this down, this all laid out. Heavy, expensive, high power requirements, and a very predictable operating sequence. Why? Because we wrote it. Okay, so the problems with big is, one, we cannot predict extraterrestrial conditions. We don't know what the hell is out there. Therefore, it's difficult to program for them. Number two, even with lots of compute power, learning algorithms are nowhere near good enough. Which is why we still insist on sending humans out for things as much as possible, because computers just can't learn and adapt yet. Problem three, specialization means critical components are always at risk. You can back it up by stacking multiple components, but at some point there's always a failure point, right? Then the little architecture is the opposite. Simple, modular, self-replicating things with very little power requirements, things that can self-assemble, and things that usually weigh little, have a very small operating payload. Now the problem here is, due to the lack of compute capability and power and storage capability, it's really hard to define a complex mission. It's hard to tell a cube of this size that you are supposed to go turn Mars into something like Earth. Number two, it's very hard to predict, because these are essentially self-organizing components. So you don't know how they will react. That's part of what makes them attractive, because they can adapt to situations, but you don't know how they're going to do it. Then problem three, potential evolutionary hazard, grey goo scenario. We'll get to that. So these are the two approaches that we have always taken. Good example of this is what Robert came up with. the repro project, that's big. The rovers that we sent to Mars, that's big, right? The research that the world is doing right now is in little, because somewhere along the 1990s there was a whole movement focused on this, and they realized that, you know what, we can start testing out little things. We can start doing this in laboratories right now. So here is a really good example of the software problems that we face. I'm literally going to read out from Robert Freider's paper here. The computer system designed for datas is extremely complex. It must be able to engage autonomous activity during a 50 to 100 year mission, vary the operating goals, embed it in its own software, and to perform repair strategy, blah blah blah. It must also be capable of heuristic functions, including lateral thinking and intuition. Factory and repro computers are at least orders of magnitude more complicated. So this is the problem. Heuristic functions, lateral thinking, intuition, we have not gotten there yet. This is the equivalent of saying, right, we shall colonize the universe, and here's the plan to do it. We shall start from Alpha Centauri. It's the problem is getting there. All those problems that have to be solved along the way have not yet been solved. So, like I said, we really have enough trouble getting a rover to work on Mars. So, little it is there. Alright, so as for little robots, Cornell came up with something called, researchers at Cornell University came up with something really cool in 2005. Shall I show the video? Check this out. Oh, check this out.
What is this?
This is a little block robot that can make copies of itself, given the materials, given more things like itself. That's a start. Right, so that's a start. This was in 2005. Essentially what you get here is a single module, and you can see the motor mechanism inside that. Essentially it replicates it. It doesn't do anything useful other than reproduce, but it's a start. M-Tran from Tokyo is also pretty interesting. This is called a mail module. It's essentially what's got all the components in it, and it's coupled up with passive modules that hook onto more mail modules. So you have a system that's kind of like a jigsaw like that. Two different types of components. Look at that.
Love the noise it makes. Sounds angry.
It's got vague proximity sensors and stuff, and this is cool. So you see, this modular structure is perhaps a better form of thinking than the traditional big structure, because instead of relying on humans to plan things out, you design a system flexible enough to adapt. If something flips it over, it has to go back. It can't send a message to Europe saying, I'm sorry, I'm lost in Mars.
Can't do a relay.
Yeah.
What are the feeling?
It's waiting for more light, they hope.
Oh,
They planned it though, right?
check this out.
Lots of moving parts.
It's like
Like a bunch of Autobots
it sounds like
bitching at each
every
other.
part is yelling at each other. It's like, no, you go there, damn it. But yeah, there you are. It just, it's trying to organize itself into a line. It'll get there.
And that's an emergent behavior.
Yeah, it'll get there eventually. Anyway. And further down the line you have, that's honestly that's a bit fancy and very Japanese, but these little parts yelling at each other.
Be careful, it's not stable. No, that's not stable.
So as you can see, if this thing were being hunted, let's say by a tiger, it wouldn't really stand a chance, but
There are no tigers in space.
Tiger would watch it for hours.
True, but in terms of reaction times, this is very slow. But it's a start. This is a project that's been happening since 1998. They've been researching on this, and it's a big one. It's been good. Oh yeah, what's this? So all of that. Right? It's stuck and it's trying to get across. You see that?
So none of this is programmed, it's figuring it out on its own.
Yeah. Well, again, it's pretty rudimentary so far. So, how this works is, like I said, it has a static block. They call it a female block, but in the interest of not being sexist, let's call it a static block that enables an attached block to rotate 180 degrees. Then it has the actual male block with the parts, and each of these systems has its own processing, works autonomously. You can connect multiple things together. Then there is MIT Smart Center. This is a bit of it's essentially tiny modules that sort of understand where each other are. They can map themselves out in linear space. They know where the other component is relative to itself, and they can connect via electromagnets. So they've been, for example, if you put it in a cup full of sand and you shake it around, eventually it will map out the interior, and then it can replicate that shape. It's not to the level of a space probe yet, but certain applications. So you see these different strands of research diverging towards a common goal. So the challenge is this: whatever we make, we have to make it smaller and far more robust. Like these are extremely fragile, extremely. You need insanely robust things. You need to make them able to manufacture themselves from raw materials. We have not got to this stage yet. And just as importantly, make them able to carry out a complex long-term mission without screwing up. This is really important, because what happens is, when you screw up and when you have a replicating machine, you end up with lots of screw-ups. So, for example, Bill Joy, the former CEO of Sun Microsystems, wrote an article for Wired called "Why the Future Doesn't Need Us." And in that he postulated that if we actually get around to creating proper von Neumann machines, they might advance to the point where the logical outcome is that we are rather inefficient compared to them. They have evolved, and thus they don't need us. So there are three primary theories of death by von Neumann. The first is called grey goo / ecophagy. Again, Robert Freitas, the godfather, comes into play here. This essentially means, what grey goo means is that a single von Neumann machine replicates to the point where it covers everything. It destroys all resources. It consumes until it cannot support itself. It's destroyed everything. That's death by grey goo. The second is berserkers, by our friend Fred Saberhagen. It was a okay book. So one postulation is that an out-of-control mutation might result in a series of killers, essentially. Destroying stuff as opposed to terraforming for the greater good, anti-terraformers, breaking down without building up. The other possibility is super-evolution, where, like Bill Joy suggested, you come up with increasingly efficient systems that eventually realize that humans don't really need to be there anymore. And boom. So to get around all this, we are nearing the end of the presentation. So to get around all this, I suggest, essentially suggest a slightly wacky solution. Why are we reinventing the wheel? There are things called extremophiles. Extremophiles are essentially small bacteria that live in really extreme situations. When we say extreme, we mean really extremely extreme. Like we're talking at the bottom of the Mariana Trench. Insane pressures, insane conditions that no usual organism would be able to tolerate. So, without further ado, let me introduce you to my friend, the tardigrade.
Tardigrade.
Sorry, tardigrade. It's like the tardigrade. Also, this is a shot by NASA. It looks like a combination between Blastoise, police water cannon, and a bear. True facts about tardigrades. Tardigrades can survive a few temperatures from 150 Celsius, a range of temperatures from 150 Celsius to 200 Celsius. They can survive pressures from that of a vacuum to pressures of more than 1,200 atmospheres.
To negative 200.
Yes, negative 200, my
Yeah.
bad. Some species can survive pressures of more than 6,000 atmospheres. That's 6 times more than the bottom of the Mariana Trench. They can withstand up to 5,000 grays of gamma rays and 6,200 grays of heavy ions. This is a measure of radiation per mass, right? 5 to 10 is enough to kill most humans. Tardigrades are the first known animal to survive outer space. They took a bunch of these guys up in an experiment called Photon 3. They exposed batches of them to outer space for 10 days, and they came back and they found that more than 50% of them actually survived, and they produced progeny that went on to do very well and frequently got scholarships. So, oh, sorry. There we are. Right, so a student of MIT in 2002 called Haruki Sayama wrote something called von Neumann's machine cell enhancing the robustness self-replication process. Basically, in a nutshell, what he said was that within the von Neumann process, it's perfectly okay to include a step where your self-replicating machines build a platform, a workspace that contains more suitable conditions for future generations to be built. So, you're looking at very hostile situations and potentially extremely hostile situations in outer space. So the takeaway is that you might as well, there are a couple of assumptions, but the fundamental takeaway is that you might as well build a sort of environment in which successive generations can incubate. The assumptions are the construction and duplication processes that are originally sensitive to perturbation can be substantially stabilized by putting them on some sort of solid supporting structure. Which makes sense. Number 2, workspaces are generally made of a simple but extensive repetition of the same kind of components. Also makes sense. Assumption 3, the size or the upper bound of the workplace that you're building for construction and duplication processes can be estimated from the instruction tape, which is the original set of instructions. So based on that, connecting the dots, not sure you can read the text, but what I propose is essentially we engineer rudimentary hardcore extremophiles that go out and sort of start building this workspace, which you call a Garden of Eden, right? These guys can survive extreme conditions. Let them survive extreme conditions and build up a space where less extreme things can come, like where you can build more stuff. Some of this building will, they might have to convert existing materials to more usable stuff, like breaking down different forms of carbon into more usable materials. But essentially that's what they do. They go out, a few generations, lots of generations will die, many will die, a few will survive, and over time you will find gardens of Eden, right? And once the gardens are ready, you deploy a second wave of more complex machines inside the garden. They bootstrap from inside less extreme conditions, right? And why I say machine is that these things will effectively not evolve. Or rather, if they evolve, they will evolve according to human design processes, so that we avoid the grey goose scenario. They will essentially bootstrap. One machine will build a constructor that will build a more complex machine that will build a more complex constructor, and they will build power mechanisms, and they will essentially bootstrap into a grander design.
But the constructors are built in weakness because they can't handle a situation from scratch, because it's designed to work from the Garden of Eden.
Yes, it will have to work inside that environment. Because our machines are nowhere near as robust as extremophiles, and I doubt that you can actually get extremophiles to build something epic. So let them do the processing of raw material. We'll take that raw material and build something epic out of it. And then you let the machines operate and multiply from inside the Gardens of Eden, while more adapted extremophiles will constantly keep expanding the Garden of Eden to a size postulated within the DNA. So, yeah, that is it.
Hardcore. Are you taking questions?
Yes, please. Any questions? Keep in mind that I'm only a noob at this. Yeah.
Energy.
Pardon?
Oh,
Energy.
was going to say
Problem of
that.
energy. How do you problem
Yes.
solve energy?
The third problem, energy. For the solution, or
Photosynthesis.
Where does the energy come from?
I was thinking photosynthesis, but there are also the first stage, extremophiles. There are extremophiles adapted to heat sources from geothermal vents. Then there is also always a photosynthesis option. So two potential energy sources there. But moving on to the second stage, you can't really rely on machines working on photosynthesis, nor can we rely on them being near the geothermal vents, because otherwise they're dead. So I postulate that you might have to have extremophiles building something like a very simple solar cell array. Something that can be built using simple but extremely fast successive repetitions.
Is the environment extreme, or is it because it's an extreme environment, or is it extreme because it's just not convenient?
Could be not convenient. They could land on the middle of the sea. The point is, since we can't plan for extreme conditions, and if we let the planning process, if we let the planning process happen according to the laws of nature, we might potentially end up in grey goo. So the solution is you normalize those conditions. You create a Garden of Eden so that there are parameters within which you can work, same parameters, a simplified model. So you build up predictable machines from inside that.
So are you suggesting a Garden of Eden as a safety mechanism? Or,
yes.
okay, primarily a safety mechanism?
Yes, a net, a resource center, and everything, a base from a foundation on which to build the second, third and successive generations. Anything else?
I'm good.
I'm surprised you didn't touch on Drexler and Angels of Creation and nanotechnology.
You did go
I did. No, there was a quote there.
Oh, did I walk away at that point?
There was like an entire paragraph on the Angels of Creation.
Okay,
Lots of
good.
people
I'm
hate
done.
That's where the term grey goo comes from, I think.
Yeah.
Lots of people hate Drexler though. No, it's not.
No, it's fine, it's fine.
It's the
Yeah.
hyperphagia.
So yeah, the quote is, plants with leaves no more efficient than today's solar cells could outcompete real plants, crowding the biosphere with inedible foliage. Omnivorous bacteria could outcompete real bacteria. Dangerous replicators could easily be too tough, too small, and rapidly spreading to stop. And at least if we make no preparation, we have trouble enough controlling viruses and fruit flies. And this problem will essentially be called the grey goo problem. Uncontrolled replicators need not be grey or gooey, but this is essentially a sort of 1% scenario where they replicate into basically a uniform sludge of stuff that consumes all the resources, eventually hits a critical mass where it can't sustain itself and starts consuming each other naturally.
Just one last question from me, that's if you don't mind. How quickly do you think we can use this technology to help us with problems we're facing today here on Earth?
At least 10-15 years off, because I looked up the MIT SANS project. They postulate that it's actually going to be 10 years before it gets to any useful phase. This is definitely 10-15 years off. It needs a lot more than university money behind it. See, NASA was funding epic stuff.
It needs military money.
Yes. Well, military, or I was going to say commercial money. Because NASA was funding epic stuff. Back in the 80s, NASA dreamed. They were thinking of self-replicating lunar factories. They don't dream anymore because they don't have the money to do it. However, you do have billionaires, you do have trillionaires. We need somebody like essentially the Elon Musks, the dreamers, the Richard Bransons. We need somebody come forth and drop money into the project.
Okay, so in addition to what you said about energy, what about matter?
Pardon?
What about matter?
That's easy.
How? Say you want to build a lunar factory.
Okay.
Now where are you going to get the materials?
The moon.
Because the
moon.
The moon, like silica.
The moon has titanium, has
the planet
oxygen.
Yeah, but you don't mine it. That's the thing. So you got to.
So energy.
So
bonuses.
this is precisely why that extreme file phase exists. to extract that and convert it into processable function.
Yeah, what I'm
Actually,
saying is
the moon
that
is
basically robot
the moon is
moves.
a